Good afternoon, Tony Goldstone. It's Saturday, the 6th of December. So I was hoping to do an update last week after the budget, but from a pensions point of view, things were pretty quiet, to be honest, on the budget front, considering that, as I said in my YouTube from about a month ago, probably seen more speculation about this budget in terms of pensions and pension tax than any other budget. And my advice then, which is kind of the same as any pre-budget speculation, is don't make decisions on probably your biggest or one of your biggest assets based on speculation. You can only act on what the law and the regulations are now, and that in retrospect was the right advice because there were no change. So you don't do irreversible things based on rumours. So the budget itself was fiscally quite significant in terms of tax raising, predominantly through fiscal drag, which many of you will kind of understand what that is, and I'm not going to cover that now. And a few small tweaks elsewhere, things like dividend taxes changes for the basic and high, but not the additional rate changes, and people with property, there's a few changes there. But from a pensions point of view, for the NHS pension, there are basically no changes. So the changes to salary sacrifice are absolutely nothing to do with the NHS pension landscape, and it's nothing to do with people that have got things like salary sacrifices for cars. So you can completely ignore that. That is nothing to do with you. So anyway, onwards and upwards, because there's been quite a few changes in terms of the modeler and some exciting news. So let's jump into that and show you what's changed. So we've now launched the Gold PLUS product, which is a new product which includes scheme pays analysis. People that previously bought gold have been upgraded, and if you log on to your previously issued links, you should see that they've changed automatically to Gold Plus, and the new functionality should be available. If it's not, just reply to the email with your link and let us know, and we can check that in the background. And as I said, the principal change for Gold Plus, which is now priced at 125 plus VAT or 150, is in addition to everything that was in the silver, so basic tapering analysis, 100k tax trap, SIPs, income control, marginal rate analysis. There's now advanced tapering analysis, which was in the previous gold, but then the new scheme pays and early retirement analysis. And I'll go through that in just a minute. And you've got that if it says Gold Plus at the top when you log into your modeler. There's also been a few changes to our Concierge service. For those of you that don't know what Concierge is, really simple. So if using any sort of modeler is all a bit scary for you, because modelling isn't for everybody, you can get us to do most of the hard work for you. So essentially, click on this link, pay 11880, including VAT, and all you need to do is download 5 documents, and it literally takes a minute on ESR to download these 4 pay slips and a total reward statement. And then if you click through to the Concierge service, you simply just drag and drop them to the relevant boxes here. So these are the 4 pay slips, so March 23, 24, 25 and October 25, and also the total reward statement that just gets dragged in here. We have just made a couple of changes to the kind of descriptions about exclusions and inclusions, and it's absolutely fine if you want us to check, for example, if your kind of maternity pay has been correctly processed for annual leave, because that's a really common source of error. But if you do that, can you please, at the same time as ordering Concierge, request an O5 service and pay extract? You just click the link there and it will just take you through to a template, and then you can ping it off to BSA. That normally takes, it's normally about the same day. But you can just go ahead and order and then just forward that on to us when you get it. And similarly for people that have got complex changes in work time equivalent, so if you've gone between less than full-time and full-time, or you've changed the amount of less than full-time during a tax year, that isn't properly reflected on just your payslip. So please, again, go ahead and order, but just also request at the same time an O5 service and pay extract, and then you can either email it to us, or if you've already got one, and a current one, and it's in Excel format, you can upload it here in this optional step for an O5 service and pay extract. So anyway, back to the modeler. And there's a little change here which is kind of just cosmetic, because if you've got all the features, the page is pretty long, and you'll kind of get past the point of needing some of the earlier pages because you've finished the inputs. You now just want to play with the outputs and see what happens if you make changes. You can collapse those from both the page and also from the PDF, so you're not, if you're printing them out, you're not printing out the same pages again unnecessarily, so you can customize it to show as much or as little as you want. So I'm just going to take a drink and then we'll onwards and upwards to scheme pays. So this is our case study, and if we just show you on this 3-year view, this is going to be not atypical for quite a lot of consultant colleagues in England. And they will see that they may have, particularly those in 1995, may have no charge in 23-24, and indeed lots will have negative growth. I'll come on to that in a minute, and that will generate a lot of carry forward. But some may find that they've got charges in both 24-25 and also in the current tax year 25-26. And so when you look in the kind of medical forums and DNUK and various other places, you see people kind of say, well, what's the point of a pay rise if it all goes in tax? And for some people, the magnitude of an annual allowance charge in a single year may be more than the pay rise in that single year. And my feedback for those people always is firstly, you've got to remember that the pay rise is paid for the rest of your working career in general. And then also that pay rise feeds into a pension rise, and that pension rise is paid for the entirety of your retirement. So you can't just look at what's happening in a single year and say, there's no point in having a pay rise. It's a nonsensical argument. So the other way of kind of assessing value of kind of what happens to your pension long term is if you look at it paid as a scheme pays loan rather than paying the charge up front from your post-tax income. And so that's where this new feature on scheme pays on the NHS component of any annual allowance charge, because obviously if you've got external pensions, you may have non-annual allowance, non-NHS annual allowance charges, and also what happens in terms of early retirement impact, because a little bit unfairly, the way that they calculate annual allowance, it's kind of measured against your pension at your normal retirement ages in both schemes. So, for example, for a lot of people, that's going to be age 60 in 95 or age 65 in 2008, and it's going to be 67 or 68 or possibly later for those in 2015. And very few people will use all of that benefit, but they will be paying tax on it via annual allowance. So it's important when you're kind of doing analysis to try and look at what the impact of early retirement is, as well as on scheme pays. So you'll remember in that preamble there was no tax charge for this member in 23-24, but there was in the other 2 tax years. Crucially, we need to know your date of birth, because that determines 2 things. Firstly, it determines your state pension age, and secondly, because scheme pays is a loan, it determines the length of that loan. So essentially what they do with scheme pays is they take the charge that you want the scheme to pay, and they turn that into a DC loan, and then they apply interest on that at the prevailing rate of interest from the previous September, so that's CPI interest, and then they add a small amount called scape, and the current scape rate is 1.7%, but that changes and that's reviewed every 4 years. So the full impact of inflation can't be known, but the scape does vary from time to time, and again, for modelling, the only thing you can reasonably do is use the current rate of scape. You just need to be aware that the rate of scape is potentially a future variable. So the length of loan is from when you want to retire, and that may be different. And obviously with kind of conventional pension reports, you might just give, say I want to retire at X, or I might want to take partial retirement at X and then work to Y. But the reality is those things change. Those things change all the time. And so what's really nice about this is you can play around with the retirement ages. You can look at how it pans out for you, and then you can see the impact both on your scheme pays loan and also on your actuarially reduced bit of your pension. So, for example, in this case, in 23-24, if we're going at age 57 into partial retirement, so we take all our 95 benefits, for example, but then work another 2 years, that will show us that because of actuarial reduction, you get some reduction in both of those benefits because you're going early, in this case, in both schemes. And again, this is a really common area of confusion for people, that they think that early retirement is some kind of massively punitive way of reducing your pension, but it isn't. It's designed to be broadly what we call actuarially neutral. So the idea is because you're drawing pension earlier, that means you're getting pension paid for longer, and that's why it's reduced. So for example, in the case of 57 and 59, so normal retirement age in 95 is 60, so that member would get that for 3 extra years. And in this case it's 68, so between 59 and 68 they would get that for an extra 9 years, and so that's why those pensions are reduced accordingly. So you get paid less pension for longer. Now there isn't any annual allowance to pay in this year, so there's no scheme pays impact, and then because you're paid retirement income for life, and that increases by CPI inflation, you need to kind of just vaguely bear in mind what the value for the money of the pension is. So in this year, this tax year, this member was paying the then 13.5% rate, so they've paid 18,000 in gross contributions before tax relief, but the employer has put in much more than that, and because of the employee contribution, that's what contributes towards the level of the benefits. And then there also becomes the issue of mortality. Now, because we are doctors, we probably have a much better concept of what our own morbidity and expected mortality is based on family history and comorbidities, etc., than the rest of the population. But I think a lot of people underestimate mortality. So I'll just leave you a couple of stats. So based on scheme experience data, so this is, on everyone in the scheme, 1.5 million active members, etc. People that live to normal retirement without taking ill health retirement at age 60 can be expected on scheme experience data to live till 88 for a male or 90 for a female. And I think that's a lot higher than people think. But if you want to put a reduced value in below, 88, 89, 90, you can put in whatever value you want. And then that will give you kind of an idea of how much you would be expected to get back in retirement compared to how much you put in. So in this case, it's £4.92. So let's now move on to 24-25. Now, I explained earlier that 24-25 may be a, inverted commas, bad year for annual allowance for lots of people because of the pay awards. But it's important not to throw toys out the pram because of the annual allowance charge, and to kind of just sit back and look at the numbers. So let's go through this case for this particular person in 24-25. So we can see that they've put in 19,000 this time, a lower rate but a high salary, so high contributions. We can see that their pension has gone from 42,000 to 51,000. So that's already a big pension growth, and that's what's reflected in these charts up here. So this is that pension growth there of 9041. But that's not the full story, because the 2015 pension will continue to grow by 1.5% above inflation until retirement. So that's called revaluation, and it's really important. So as I said, if we're assuming that inflation is zero, so all of these numbers are in real terms and show us what we would get in real terms in retirement, that 2015 pension will grow until our chosen retirement age. So here I've only said it's 59, but if I put that up, you can see this value here for pension is going up and up and up because of a revaluation. So none of these things are static, and that's why I think this kind of style of report is much better than a kind of a static report, because you can play with the numbers and look at different variables. But now let's get on to scheme pays, because I think there's a perception that scheme pays will completely destroy your pension. But there's been a lot of changes to both how annual allowance tax works and also to how scheme pays work since, for example, the peak of the NHS pension crisis in maybe 2019. So now, because of the high level of AA, because of negative pension growth being calculated, because the interest rates come down, that scape rate has come down, and also because the conversion factors have come down, scheme pays is now a much more reasonable proposition. So this member, for example, has a tax charge of almost 10,000, 9,342. That's this figure down here. And that reduces the pension by £438. So that might be a lot less than people would have predicted, but that varies on all of these parameters. So if you change these parameters, that amount of the scheme pays will change, and that's the whole point, is that this is a dynamic tool to look at the relative value of scheme pays. But it's important again to remember, not to throw the teddies out of the pram, because you've got an AA charge because the pension growth has gone up a lot. So up here we said that they'd put in on average, almost £5 to get £1 back. But this, even after paying a scheme pays charge, they've got £10 back for every pound contributed, and that's because the pension growth was much higher in this year because of the 1995 component. Now, this is what we call the simplified view, which is the default view. But if people want more detail, and everyone's different in the amount of detail that they want, if you turn that off, you can then see a custom view that shows the split between your 95 pension and your 2015 pension. So the grey bits are how much pension you get to keep at the retirement ages that you choose, and then we've got a deduction for scheme pays and deduction for early retirement. So for example, if we put these retirement ages up, so for example, if instead of going at 57 we go at 60, we can see we completely get rid of that early retirement bit, because we've gone at the normal retirement age for that scheme. I've said this a million times, and I really wish the scheme would be better at telling members this, but it's really important to remember that if you retire after your normal pension age in the 1995 scheme only, you are just giving up your pension. So there is no late retirement factor if you go above 60. So if you are still, plodding on and haven't taken retirement or retire and return or partial retirement and you're 64, you've given 4 years of your pension back to the government, and that is not a financially savvy or smart thing to do. So take advice and look at your options around retirement if that is you. So I said that 24-25 is a bad year, but 25-26 is potentially another really bad year, and the reason for that is carry forward. Now, so if we roll back 3 years ago or so, I did this tool for the BMA because one of the things that really irritated me, and I've been campaigning on for about a decade along with others, is this thing called the negative PIA issue. And what used to happen before the 23-24 tax year is that if one of your pensions went down and the other pension went up, they used to zero off, ignore the negative growth, because the Finance Act only was looking at increases and not decreases, and that essentially was, in my view and the BMA's view, pension theft. Now, we did a lot of campaigning around this. This tool that I did was viewed 20,000 times, and we did get most of the changes we want around the negative PIA issue, and also about another issue that was really bad for GPs in particular, called CPI disconnect. So fortunately that lobbying was very successful and we got the outcome we want, and that meant if we go back to the numbers, what lots of you will be finding if you're modelling your pension or if you're opening brown envelopes is, for the first time ever, you've got a number in brackets, which means a negative number, and lots of people are confused by the brackets as well. And so that means, for example, in this example where you've got minus 47 and plus 41, that completely zeroes itself off. So this member has got no pension growth, and so they've been able to carry forward any unused growth. And because of that, the 24-25 tax year has been somewhat cushioned for a lot of people. So although there was big growth because of the partial restoration of our pay, and I say partial restoration of our pay rather than a big pay rise because that's exactly what it was, it's going to mean big tax charges, but some of those tax charges will be offset quite a lot by negative growth. But the converse to that story is that if you do have a tax charge in 24-25, much smaller levels of growth in 25-26 could deliver big tax charges. So this member has got a tax charge of 9,342 in 24-25, but jump forward to 25-26 and they've got a much bigger tax charge of 27,215. But the real beauty of tools such as this is because we're in the tax year, we can do something about it. So, for example, you'll see that we've given this example member threshold or taxable income of 206,000, and with threshold income of 206,000, they've got a 27,000 tax charge. I'm just going to make this simple again. They've got a 27,000 tax charge, and that's meant a scheme pays deduction of £1,275. So what if, for example, we said, well, let's decrease it by to 199,000, and we can see straight away that the annual allowance charge has gone down massively. Now, also bear in mind that this scheme pays analysis is only looking at the NHS annual allowance charge. So if you, for example, use a SIP and a private pension, then that would need to be settled separately and couldn't be settled by NHS scheme pays, because the maximum for NHS scheme pays is going to be your NHS liability. But you can see there we've made 27 go down to 17,394. So that's been an almost £10,000 reduction in tax, and therefore a much smaller reduction from scheme pays simply by modifying your income. And that's the meant to be the real benefit of tools like this. And other options include, for example, you could have put, I think that was 205 before, wasn't it? Sorry, just so we're comparing like with like. You could, for example, have put £6,000 gross into a SIP, and similarly that will have massively reduced the AA charge on the NHS component, but that may have left you with a tax charge to pay on that 6,000. So 45% times 6,000, I think, is 2,700 in relation to the SIP. But even so, that strategy will have saved you a ton of money by making that small alteration rather than just ploughing on. And so that's the real beauty of these tools, is that it's all dynamic. You can play with the parameters. You can look at when you want to retire, if your health changes, or if you want to give it a more reliable estimate of mortality. You can do. You can look at what you can change during the tax year, and that potentially could massively reduce your AA liability. So in the example we just gave there, it was £10,000, wasn't it, by not tapering rather than tapering. There are kind of general disclaimers at the bottom, and you can click through to the full terms and conditions, but just some important disclaimers about scheme pays in particular. So none of this is a recommendation to use scheme pays, because the choice of whether to use scheme pays versus paying from your post-tax income is a nuanced one, because if you're paying, you then obviously lose the investment opportunity of whatever you would have done with that cash, versus scheme pay. So it's not a simple decision, and none of this is financial advice, and it's certainly not a recommendation or suggestion to use scheme pays. And some people would definitely benefit from financial advice in that regard, but it does just allow you to see the magnitude of what scheme pays reductions will do, because for lots of people it's not going to be as bad as you think. So happy modelling in that regard, because this is kind of brand new. we've just said that it's currently undergoing final user acceptance testing. So if you see any issues that you think are bugs or errors or defects, it's obviously had lots of testing internally and externally, but please do feedback via the email address if you think there's any bugs, errors or defects, and of course we will get those changed and added to the change log. So a couple more bits just to update you on, if I may. We released this free little helper just to help people work out what average work time equivalent is if your work time equivalent changes during the tax year. So you can just put in the number of months at each WTE. So for example, if we change this to 6 months and 6 months, and then you did, let's say, 50% and 80%, it will give you an average work time equivalent value to use in the modeler, just to make it a little bit easier. I'm still working on this, and I'm going to do something else for the current 25-26 tax year, because it gets a little bit more involved, where there's kind of bits of the year that aren't finished yet, versus looking at your pay slip. So I've nearly finished that, and that'll be live shortly, and you can get that by going to bit.ly/WTE helper. So just in fairness to other tools that are available, First Actuarial and NHS employees have always had a free Ready Reckoner, and that was just updated last week, and it's an excellent little tool for most users. It's not got all the bells and whistles that our tool has, but it's free, and if people want to have a play with it, I would suggest you go along and have a look. And like my tool, it covers GPs and also hospital doctors. One word of warning: if you are in 2008, there is this warning that says it may underestimate your annual allowance position. I think this is not quite the full story. And in fact, I did flag this with NHS employees and First Actuarial last year, saying there's potential for wildly incorrect numbers in 2008. And I've run some scenarios because it's part of kind of our cross-checking and validation against the modeler. And in 2008, it can give massively overstated annual allowance, or massively understated annual allowance if you are a hospital doctor in the 2008 section. So I'm sure there'll be more on that to come, but hopefully, I'll feed that back directly, as I did with an issue last year. Hopefully that will be rapidly resolved, or they'll just pull the 2008 section modeler. The bottom line is 2008 reckonable pay is horrendously complicated, and there is no shortcut around giving it enough data to be able to do it correctly. So I suspect they'll end up pulling it, or if not, they could just add all the data fields to do it correctly. But just a word of warning, if you are 2008 and you're a hospital doctor, I would definitely give this the wide berth until they've looked into that issue. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. I will just have a quick read of the list of all the things that I said I would talk about. And yeah, I think we have kind of gone through everything. So just backpay was one issue. So yeah, backpay is a big issue. So we're doing lots of Concierge, and as I said at the beginning, Concierge is where you just upload your pay slips, your TRS, and we will kind of start you off with the modeler. And what we're seeing in lots of these is this pattern here, and let me just change that so you can see it a bit better. So what we're seeing is when we compare your TRS value, which is here, with your full-time equivalent pay year-to-date figure, there is an exact match in all 3 years. And some people may think, brilliant, jobs are good in, it's an exact match, everything's working. But unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth, because the problem is that because we had significant pay awards last year, there was back pay that should have gone back into the 23-24 tax year in March 2024, and that produces something called inordinate pay. So what does that mean? So under the normal pension scheme rules, you're only allowed to pension up to full-time pay, to stop people kind of gaming and doing loads more in their final year and then getting a massive final salary pension, essentially. But it should be the same rules that apply for annual allowance taxation. And so if they keep that March 24 pay slip in your 24-25 tax year, which is the wrong tax year, you can end up paying more tax. And so this is when you get our concierge report, it shows you what the calculated back pay should be based on your pay. So for example, this member, it's seen that their 24 full-time equivalent pay was 119,333. The pay dispute, it went to 131,964, and with 3% on call, they've calculated that the back pay should be 108,502. And it sounds like a kind of trivial amount, but let's just work through the numbers to show you what that means in terms of annual allowance. And so if you process them properly, this is what it should look like. It's better not zoomed in that bit. So it should look like a balanced match. So that 108,502 should have gone back into the previous year, and that 108,582 should have come out of the 24-25 tax year. And because it's only 1k, and it can be much more than 1k, depending on what year consultant you are and on call, etc., it can actually mean quite a lot. So if we just translate that through to a tax charge for this member who's only just over the threshold income limit of 210, you can see that there's a tax charge for 24-25, a whopping tax charge of 38,292. But what does that look like if you allocate it correctly? Well, that tax charge has gone down massively to 34,000, and that will save you a ton of money. So this member has paid 118.80 for concierge, but they've saved 3,624 in tax by sending an email to get that back pay reallocated. So just kind of a word of warning, I've obviously tried over the years to do lots of videos and free tools and get people to do it, but it's complicated and lots of people will fall through the cracks, and some people just can't do this themselves. And so please reach out to us. Use our concierge service. If you download those 4 documents, it literally takes a minute. If you upload them by 2 p.m, you'll get a same day service with a comprehensive report over what you've got to do. And as per this example, the member has saved a load of money, by reducing their tax charge by 3,624 because they're not paying tax on pension that they're never going to receive, which would have been grossly unfair and inappropriate. But last but not least, the only way that you can get any of these tools, either the completely free growth tool up here or the concierge service or the gold service including scheme pays, is by registering at bit.ly/GPFT or using this QR code. We usually get back to you in a few hours during the day, so you'll get a custom link to your modeler, and then you can use that to work out your growth as long as you don't apply for one of the small exclusion groups, and then look at all the other options. So happy modelling, everybody. Please don't have nightmares about tax. I know a lot of people posting in the forums are extremely stressed because they're getting brown envelopes with these hideously large growth numbers for 24-25, reflecting the pay awards. But hopefully, if you use tools such as this, you can see that actually, even if you can't afford to pay those charges and you use scheme pays, it is generally a good and tax efficient way of settling a charge, but that's not financial advice. You've got to make your own decision over what to do. But whatever you do, don't worry and stress about it, because there are options, and almost never the correct thing to do is come out of the scheme. That's great. Thank you very much, everybody.